turnings for gravel and powdered steel for cement." Joe jolted erect. He looked startledly at Haney and the chief, and Haney's mouth was dropping open. A great, dreamy light seemed to be bursting upon him. The chief regarded Mike with very bright eyes, and Mike, sturdily, forcefully, coldly, made a sort of speech in his small and brittle voice. "Things could be made of solid steel," he said sharply, "without rolling or milling or die-casting the metal, and without riveting or arc-welding the parts together. The trick was powder metallurgy. Very finely powdered metal, packed tightly and heated to a relatively low temperature, sintered is the word, becomes a solid mass. Even alloys can be made by mixing powdered metals. The process had been used only for small objects, but there was the analogy to concrete. A very little powder could weld much metal, in the form of turnings and smaller bits, and the result would be solid steel." Then Mike grew impassioned. "There was a wooden mock-up of a spaceship in the shed," he said. "It was an absolutely accurate replica, in wood, of the ships that had been destroyed. But one could take castings of it, and use them for molds, and fill them with powder and filings and turnings, and heat them not even red-hot, and there would be steel hulls in one piece. Solid steel hulls, needing no riveting nor anything else, and one could do it fast. While the first hull was fitting out, a second could be molded." The chief roared. "You fool little runt!" he bellowed. "Trying to give us credit for that? You got more sense than any of us. You worked that out in your own head." Haney rubbed his hands together. He said softly, "I like that. I do like that." Major Holt turned his eyes to Joe. "What's your opinion?" "I think it's the sort of thing, sir, that a professional engineer would say was a good idea, but not practical. He'd mean it would be a lot of trouble to get working. But I'd like to ask my father. They have done powder welding at the plant back home, sir." Major Holt nodded. "Call your father. If it looks promising, I'll pull what wires I can." Joe went out with the others. Mike was sweating. All unconsciously, he twisted his hands one within the other. He had had many humiliations because he was small, but lately he had humiliated himself by not believing in his friends. Now he needed desperately to do something that would reflect credit on them as well as himself. Joe made the phone call. As he closed the door of the booth, he heard the chief kidding Mike blandly. "Hey, Einstein," said the chief, "how about putting that brain of yours to work on a faster-than-light drive?" But then he began to struggle with the long-distance operator. It took minutes to get the plant, and then it took time to get to the point, because his father insisted on asking anxiously how he was and if he was hurt in any way, personal stuff. But Joe finally managed to explain that his call dealt with the desperate need to do something about a space fleet. His father said grimly, "Yes, the situation doesn't look too good right now, Joe." "Try this on for size, sir," said Joe. He outlined Mike's scheme. His father interrupted only to ask crisp questions about the mock-up of the tender, already in existence though made of wood. Then he said, "Go on, son." Joe finished. He heard his father speaking to someone away from the phone. Questions and answers, and then orders. His father spoke to him direct. "It looks promising, Joe," said his father. "Right here at the plant, we've got the gang that can do it, if anybody can. I'm getting a plane, and coming out there fast. Get Major Holt to clear things for me. This is no time for red tape. If he has trouble, I'll pull some wires myself." "Then I can tell Mike it's good stuff?" "It's not good stuff," said his father. "There are about 47 things wrong with it, at first glance. But I know how to take care of one or two, and we'll lick the rest. You tell your friend Mike I want to shake him by the hand. I hope to do it tonight." He hung up, and Joe went out of the phone booth. Mike looked at him with yearning eyes. Joe lied a little, because Mike rated it. "My father's on the way here to help make it work," he told Mike. Then he added, untruthfully, "He said he thought he knew all the big men in his line, and where've you been that he hasn't heard of you?" He turned away as the chief whooped with glee. He hurried back to Major Holt as the chief and Haney began zestfully to manhandle Mike in celebration of his genius. The major held up his hand as Joe entered. He was using the desk phone. Joe waited. When he hung up, Joe reported. The major seemed unsurprised. "Yes, I had Washington on the wire," he said detachedly. "I talked to a personal friend who's a 3-star general. There will be action started at the Pentagon. When you came in, I was arranging with the largest producers of powder metallurgy products in the country to send their best men here by plane. They will start at once. Now I have to get in touch with some other people." Joe gaped at him. The major moved impatiently, waiting for Joe to leave. Joe gulped. "Excuse me, sir, but my father didn't say it was certain. He just thinks it can be made to work. He's not sure." "I didn't even wait for that. Something has to turn up to take care of this situation," said the major with asperity. "It has to. This particular scheme may not work, but if it doesn't, something will come out of the work on it. You should look at a 25-cent piece occasionally, Joe." He moved impatiently, and Joe went out. Sally was smiling in the outer office. There were whoopings in the corridor beyond. The chief and Haney were celebrating Mike's brainstorm with salutary indignity, because if they didn't make a joke of it, he might cry with joy. "Things look better?" "They do," said Joe, "if it only works." Then he hunted in his pocket. He found a quarter and examined it curiously. On one side, he found nothing the major could have referred to. On the other side, though, just by George Washington's chin. He put the quarter away and took Sally's arm. "It'll be all right," he said slowly. But there were times when it seemed in doubt. Joe's father arrived by plane at sunset of that same day, and he and 3 men from the Kenmore Precision Tool Company instantly closeted themselves with Mike in Major Holt's quarters. The powder metallurgy men turned up an hour later, and a 3-star general from Washington. They joined the highly technical discussion. Joe waited around outside, feeling left out of things. He sat on the porch with Sally while the moon rose over the desert and the stars shone down. Inside, matters of high importance were being battled over with the informality and heat with which practical men get things settled. But Joe wasn't in on it. He said, annoyedly, "You'd think my father'd have something to say to me in all this mess. After all, I have been places. But all he said was, 'How are you, son? Where's this Mike you talked about?'" Sally said calmly, "I know just how you feel. You've made me feel that way." She looked up at the moon. "I thought about you all the time you were gone, and I prayed for you, Joe. And now you're back and not even busy. But you don't... It would be nice for you to think about me for a while." "I am thinking about you," said Joe indignantly. "Now what," said Sally interestedly, "in the world could you be thinking about me?" He wanted to scowl at her, but he grinned instead. End of chapter 6.